Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about my favorite plane designs for the latest version of HOI4. It took me a while to fully optimize them, but I'm very satisfied with the results, so I'm really excited to finally share them with you. Let me just say a couple of important things before we start. First of all, this video will be a bit longer than usual, because I have a lot of designs to share with you guys. You can see here some of them, this is not even all of them. And also because I would like to explain in detail how I suggest using each of them, and what adjustments you can make depending on the situation. Now you can use chapters to easily navigate to the designs you're interested in, or you can skip directly to the end of this video for a 50 seconds recap with all designs. Finally, if you wish to remain updated on future changes and improvements, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I know every YouTuber asks you to do so, but likes and comments really help the video perform well, meaning the channel will grow faster and I will be able to make more content for you guys. Now let's get into the actual designs. I will mention the most useful and common ones first, and then some more situational ones later. We're also going to go in chronological order, so we start with the F1 MG 1936. This is likely to be the first fighter that you can design early in the game. We don't have many choices here. By the way, keep in mind that I did not add the MIOs, so the stats that you see here don't really matter, because they will be heavily affected by the MIOs that you're using. The only choices basically that we have here are in terms of the range improvement. You can use drop tanks, or you can use the extra fuel tanks. Drop tanks are better defensively because they don't reduce your air defense, while extra fuel tanks are better for range. The difference in terms of air defense is pretty low, so generally I prefer the extra fuel tanks. But since drop tanks allow for better stats, I included them in the full template. Feel free to change. It also really depends on where you're playing in the game. If you're in Europe, you don't need a lot of range. If you play somewhere else, you may need more range, so you want to go for the extra fuel tanks instead. This last module is optional, but the defense turret increases the air defense and air attack. We don't particularly care about the max speed, 3% is nothing. So I think it's worth adding this extra defense turret here. Now there is also another variation to this design, and that is if you have access to cannons. Some countries already have access to cannons in 1936. Germany and the Soviet Union come to mind, but they may not be the only ones. Well, then cannons are better than light machine guns, especially in terms of air attack. So you can go for this design instead with one cannon and then for light machine guns. You get better air attack compared to the previous design. Everything else is the same. You will also want to produce some CAS, so here is my CAS design for 1936. It's pretty basic. In this case, we are going for the extra fuel tanks, mostly because we need to keep the weight. The drop tanks are a bit heavier, so we cannot afford them, and it's actually better to go for extra fuel tanks and dive brakes, even in terms of air defense. So this is the most optimal choice, both for range and for air defense. I also created a more offensive version of this CAS 1, I call it C1 in my runs. And that's by using a small bomb base. In this case, we get some extra ground attack at the cost of range and air defense. Again, this is situational, but I tend to use this design more when I don't need the range. I don't particularly care about air defense. For example, with Italy, when I fight my wars in the Balkans, I always have the air superiority, so I'm not going to care too much about air defense. And the extra ground attack is nice. Okay, next we get into probably the main design for this video, and that is the F2 fighter for 1939. You can make these, although the design is actually a 1940 design, you can make it in 1939. Now this is a fantastic design. We get amazing range, we get amazing speed, air defense, air attack, everything is good about this design. To the point that I tend to use this design until the end of my games. I never change. So the next fighters that I'm going to share with you, they are good designs, but this one is so good that often I don't find the need to upgrade to those designs. Now to match my F2 design, I created this C2 design. It's again a 1939 design. And again, the stats are pretty good. We have very good ground attack. The air defense is fine, and we match the range of our fighters. We also match weight and thrust perfectly. In this case, I'm using these heavy bomb blocks, but if you don't have them researched or unlocked, you can also use the small bomb base instead. It is exactly the same, the weight and the ground attack is exactly the same, but small bomb base are a bit more expensive to produce. So as you can see, the production cost is 32 with the small bomb base and 28 with heavy bomb blocks. Up to you to decide whether the slightly cheaper production cost is worth the extra researches or not. But yeah, if you have them unlocked, it's better to use them. If you don't, then you can stick to the small bomb base. You may also be wondering why we're using a light MG defense turret. The air attack doesn't really matter. But I like the extra 1 air defense. It mitigates a little bit the extra fuel tanks. As you can see, we lose 2 air defense with the extra fuel tanks, but we can compensate one of them by using the light MG defense turret. Production cost is only 1, in my opinion. It's worth it, but if you don't think it's worth it, you can simply remove it, and it's totally fine. Okay, in 1943, if you want, you can make this fighter design. We use the advanced small airframe. We are also using the engine type 4. Now, compared to the previous one, we have slightly better air attack and air defense, but it is also more expensive. I'm not really sure it's worth it. To be honest, I would probably skip on this one and go directly to the next one if you want an upgrade. Or you can just stick to the 1939 design, which, as I said, it's already amazing. Similarly, the C3 design, cast 3 design in 1943, it is better than the C2, the 1939 one, but not by that much. The ground attack is a bit higher, the production cost is a little bit higher, but keep in mind that you need to research the new engines and the new airframe to unlock this design. So again, it's up to you to decide whether it's worth it or not. In my opinion, you can stick to C2 and F2 for the rest of the game. Now, in the end game, you can actually get some good designs. In this case, the stats are significantly better than the F2 design that I shared with you earlier. We use the usual modules. Of course, we are using the most advanced cannons for the highest possible amount of air attack. And then we're also using the radar to increase the night, or better, to decrease the night penalty when on interception. Now, the production cost here is stupidly high, but the thing is, by this point of the game, we're talking about the very end game, usually you do not care anymore about the production cost. In fact, in my experience, the issue is often that you have too many planes, and I cannot fit them in the airports next to the fighting area. So having a bit less, but more powerful ones could be beneficial. That's the only reason I see to upgrade to this F4 design. Otherwise, again, stick to the F2. And for the C4, for the endgame cast design, I made a very similar choice. So we don't care about the production cost. As you can see, it's incredibly expensive. But we get some very good ground attack and very good air defense. So that's the main reason to go for this C4 endgame design. So just to be clear, the choice I made with these endgame designs is to maximize the stats regardless of the production cost. And the reasoning is if you're looking for value, you don't want to upgrade to these designs in any case. It's better to stick to the F2 and C2 designs. If you don't care about production costs anymore and you just want max stats, then you go for these ones. Okay, next there is a more situational design. So in most of my games, I stick to F2 and C2. That's all I produce in terms of planes. If I really wanted to, I would upgrade F2 to F3 and then F4 in game, and the same for cast designs. But I would only produce fighters and casts. I usually do not produce naval bombers, but many of you requested a naval bomber design, so I decided to share one with you. And this is the idea for naval bombers. It's fairly easy and fairly cheap to make. Now what you really need is floats and torpedoes. Other than that, you're free to do whatever you want. You cannot actually add another offensive module in here for naval bombing. You can only use one at a time. But what you could do, if you wanted, you could add a bomb block here. As you can see, there is a little icon here, there saying that it will not be used on naval strike. But what you achieve by adding this is that you can actually use this on close air support too, and not only on naval strike if you wanted to. If you want to just make it as cheap as possible and dedicate it to naval bombing, then stick to this. The extra fuel tanks are situational, you don't absolutely need them, but it may be beneficial if you need to bomb areas of the sea, which are further away from the coast. What does it mean plus upgrades up here? So since this design is pretty obvious, even in its upgrades, I didn't make a tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 version. You simply keep upgrading the modules as you proceed through the game. So you go for the torpedo mountings 2 and then torpedo mountings 3 as you unlock them. So you just keep going up. Same thing for the engines, and the rest remains the same. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, next I also have some carrier designs. The fighter carrier designs are very similar to the fighter designs that we checked earlier. So basically it is the same thing, except it's a carrier airframe. So this is the F1, this is the carrier F2. Again, probably the best choice in general. I don't use carrier fighters, to be honest, but if you wanted to, I would go for these ones. The carrier F3, again, it's a copy of the fighter F3. And the endgame carrier would be this one. Again, more or less the same as the endgame fighter. Finally, we also have a carrier bomber, and that's very similar to our naval bomber. But we don't use floats. We don't even have access to floats in this case. So even more basic. Once again, you can add the bomb blocks if you wanted to be able to also support maybe your naval invasions with some close air support. This may be actually pretty beneficial. If you want to just make it cheap and destroy the enemy fleet, then you stick to this and then you upgrade the engine and the torpedoes as you unlock new technologies. Of course, the airframe as well. Okay, next, let's look at strategic bombers. To be completely honest with you, I don't find strategic bombers to be worth it in single player. I almost never use them. But again, I wanted to share all designs, even the ones I don't usually use, so that if you wanted to make strategic bombers, you would have some suggestions in here. This is our 1936 design. It's the first strategic bomber that you can make, but it's unlikely to be worth it in 1936. You probably have more important things to do in 1936 than producing strategic bombers. That being said, if you wanted to produce one, I would go for this one. So we are using large bomb bays, and then we're using the engine type 2, radio navigation for strategic bombing, and the light MG defense turret. This is not really needed, but it matches perfectly the thrust and weight. And that extra air defense and air attack could do something or not. It doesn't matter because it's very cheap in any case. It will actually do something. It will not do much, but it will shoot down some enemy planes and it will increase your defense by a little bit. Okay, in 1939, this is the most important design because this is when you may want to start making strategic bombers. And probably you also want to stick to this one for the rest of the game. There are not many reasons to upgrade. So we get a very good strategic bombing value of 72. We get very good range as well. Self-explanatory up here. We just go for large bomb bays. We use the best possible type of engine we have available at this time. Radio navigation 2. Bomb sights 2 for some extra strategic bombing. And then up to you, the choice for the heavy MG defense turret. You can skip on this one if you think it's not worth it. And on Reddit, I got killed when I shared this design. Oh, the defense turret is completely useless. It's a huge waste of resources. Well, this is about 1% of the production cost of this design, 1.5%. So if you think it's useless, remove it. I'm going to guarantee you that it's not going to affect the game very much. But it's an extra 2 air defense and an extra 1.5 air attack. So maybe you will shoot down one more enemy fighter attacking you. And that will be one more enemy fighter destroyed in your total war score at the end of the war. Jokes aside, up to you. You don't want it, it's a waste of points in your opinion, then remove it. I like to match weight and thrust. I feel like it's more optimized this way. But again, up to you. Strategic Bomber 3. This is a 1943 design, and here we go for a total of 87 strategic bombing, which is very, very high. The production cost is higher, and we are using the air ground radar 2 and the radio navigation 2. Now, in this case, I decided to maximize the strategic bombing. If you wanted to make it a bit cheaper, you could also use the bomb sights 2, which is 6 strategic bombing, and you could remove 1 large bomb bay. In this way, you get to 78 and you make it a bit cheaper, 137 instead of 144. Overall, probably it's not worth making this design over the previous one. Just stick to the tier 2 one. And then in the end game, I made this crazy design. This is of course not worth it. But again, you need to find a reason to justify making a modern large airframe design. And there are not many reasons. In fact, I would say stick to the tier 2 one. That's the most optimized one. But if you wanted to make a modern one, then there would be no point in having exactly the same stats as the previous ones, right? So we maximize the strategic bombing, we also maximize air defense, and we actually get to a pretty decent 18 air attack on this design, thanks to these turrets. So of course it's nuts, the production cost, but you're going to shoot down some enemy planes with this one, which may be fun, or not. Don't make it if you think it's not fun. Okay, last, I have some not very optimal designs for you, but this is the best possible choice for medium airframes. Now, as I said earlier, in my games, I only use small airframes. I only use F2 and C2, basically F1, F2, and then C1, C2. But some people ask me, what about medium airframes? What about, for example, areas where the range of the small airframes is not enough, and you may want to build medium airframes? So I came up with some medium airframe designs, and I must say that the fighters are actually pretty good. Probably not better than the small airframes, but they could put up a fight, most likely. Now let me say a couple of things before we quickly check them. My point here was justifying the choice of medium fighters over small fighters. Since small fighters are better in most situations, I always included the extra fuel tanks. Because if you're using medium fighters, you want the range. If you don't get the extra range, then there is no point in using medium fighters over small fighters. So we will always use the extra fuel tanks. Other than that, we try to maximize the air attack and the air defense without caring too much about the speed, because once again the speed is lower compared to small airframes. So to justify going for medium, we want better stats in terms of defense and attack. That's why I used so many turrets. These turrets decrease quite significantly our max speed, but our speed would already be lower than small fighters. In any case, in 1936 you can make this design, which has pretty good air attack and air defense. In 1939 you can make this actually pretty good design. We have very good range and we have very good air attack and air defense. I believe that this design could compete with our small airframe F2 design. The other advantage of small airframes is that they are cheaper, so you can produce more of them. And the air superiority, although this one gives a bit more air superiority than the small airframe ones, the air superiority is also determined by how many fighters or planes in general you have in the sky. So that's another advantage of small airframes. You will achieve the air superiority a lot earlier with small airframes, simply because you have more planes up in the sky. That being said, this design is not bad at all. In 1943 you can upgrade to this medium F3, again very good stats. The air attack is quite insane, to be honest, in 1943. It's almost the same as the air attack on our endgame small airframe, so pretty good. And then for the medium F4 I have a couple of designs. As for everything else, we already talked about it. For endgame designs we don't care about the production cost anymore. We just go for max stats regardless of how much it costs. In this case we maximize the air attack, but someone said on Reddit that the air attacks actually caps at 100. So having more than 100 doesn't affect the game, doesn't do anything. I didn't test it myself, I couldn't find any indication of that in the game, so I'm not sure, but just in case I made two different variants for this design. So this is the one with the highest air attack, and this is another one in which we sacrificed some air attack in favor of air defense. So maybe this one is a bit more balanced, it's also a bit cheaper, so this may be the better choice for the endgame medium fighter design. Assuming that you want to make it, because the previous ones were already pretty balanced, and again I find small airframes to be overall better. Okay, I will very quickly talk about CAS. The problem is you don't really want to make medium CAS. But say that you are playing a game in which you went for medium airframes instead of small ones. And you don't want to research small ones as well, so you just research the medium airframes. Now in that case you would also want to have some CAS, otherwise you would be completely out of CAS. So I made these CAS designs with medium airframes, but please keep in mind that they are absolutely not worth it. The small airframes are much better for CAS purposes. So this is only if you really don't want to research small airframes. And the main reason medium airframes are bad for CAS purposes is that you're forced to use the medium bomb bay in at least one of your modules. This is not very good for CAS, so that's why the stats for ground attack are very bad. By very bad I mean the same as the small airframe in this case, but with a production cost which is about twice as much. In 1939 you can make this one. Again, the stats are pretty similar to the small airframe CAS, but the production cost is twice as much. In 1943 you can make this one, same thing as before. And in the end game you can make this one more or less the same again as before. Plus the production cost is quite insane. So don't make a medium airframe CAS, but if you really want to, I would suggest using these designs. Okay guys, that was the last design that I had for you. This video will be quite long because there was a lot of them, but hopefully it was useful. Now I tested especially my small airframe designs and I had some very amazing results with them, so I can guarantee on their performance. But if you have some suggestions on how to further improve them, please feel free to let me know. Also, if you are going to use some of the other designs, the strategic bombers, the medium fighters, I'm especially interested in those ones. So if you test them in your games, if you use them, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think they're worth it, if you think they're good. Other than that, if you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Do not miss the other related videos about division templates, combat with and tank designs. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.